So sometimes we feel down as there's not a lot of progress on the front line and we're not really hearing great news from Ukraine and bad things are happening. Well, bad things are happening to the other side too, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. A few days ago, 4 days ago maybe, 3 days ago, I don't know, I put out a video about just encouragement. It was raining outside and I was saying, like, I feel like the weather. It just feels so gloomy. And a number of you responded to me about that. One of my viewers, his name is Rob, he said, "Hi, Professor Gerdes," and I'm going to read his email to me, and it's worth reading. "Hi, Professor Gerdes. I saw your last video about encouragement, and I thought it would be good to let you know what's going on with the other side. I'm hanging out around on various pro-Russian Telegram channels with the intention of demoralizing and demotivating the enemy as much as possible." Now, he actually spends time trolling the other side, which is kind of an interesting approach. I'm not sure if that's being really useful or not, but he comes up with great intelligence and he shares it with me, and I really appreciate that. Let me be clear that what I'm doing I would normally consider to be highly immoral. Even though it is legal, it is highly manipulative. Nevertheless, as Russia has been inflicting an infowar against the West for years, I consider what I'm doing to be the right thing and fully justified. What has surprised me about this project was the fact that it is so easy to divide people on social media and drive discontent. The way the media talk about Russia bot farms created an image in my mind that there are extremely sophisticated systems that require lots of effort and management. What I've found as a single user working on my own is that it's exceptionally easy to do, and I'm fairly new to social media. Okay, so that's really interesting in and of itself. So if a single person can do what he's claiming that he's able to do in dividing people, just imagine what a room full of people trying to do this day and night, all they have to do in life is to do this kind of thing. Just imagine the havoc that they can reap. To achieve my goals, I first adopt a profoundly anti-Western, anti-European, and anti-American stance. My discourse in the beginning is so anti-West and anti-Ukraine that I don't even get suspected of actually waging an info war against Russia. Like, they buy it hook, line, and sinker on the other side. My avatar uses a mix of anti-Western rhetoric on one hand and a depressingly cynical approach to bad news from the Russian perspective on the other. So in summary, my avatar is a Z patriot who worries excessively and repeatedly about Russian setbacks and can't shut up about them, which is a really clever way of trying to engage the other side and think through this with them and hear what they're actually saying. Okay, he said, "I note in one of your previous videos that you touched on the subject of encouragement and the fact that some people in the West are feeling a little bit more negative than usual. And we are, and there's a reason that we are, and most of my viewers are feeling this right about now, and we wish that there was some way to just, make some measured gains so that we could feel like we're making some progress. There's no need to feel this way based on my personal experience. Let me explain why. The Russians are now very demoralized, much more so than anyone in the West. They have a greater and greater trouble pushing back against my moaning and negativity." Now, it's really, really interesting. Like, what he's actually doing and how he's experiencing them experience him is quite fascinating. If things are not going great for Ukraine at the moment, then they are an absolute travesty for the Russians. And I want to point this out for my avatar's pro-Russian stance. There is a lot of pain around the current status of the Black Sea Fleet, and I keep banging on that it's an embarrassment to our Russia that so-called Ukraine has over 100 commercial ships importing weapons from the West, and we are doing nothing about it while our Black Sea Fleet cowers east of Crimea. I can only imagine how that would go over. And, it is true that the Ukrainians have either sunk or damaged upwards of 30 some odd ships. So there is something about that. Now, it seems pretty clear that Russians who are pro-Russia and talking about pro-Russian talking points are going to be not all that happy about this. I turned their own propaganda against them by using their own choice of language. Then there's the unfolding tragedy of the left bank of the Dnipro, where Ukraine is gaining ground and where the Russians tried to dismiss it as an issue in the beginning. Now remember, they were just kind of like, nah, there's nothing to see here. And then there was like, we've devastated them. And then the general was dismissed, but the hits keep coming. Like, the Ukrainians keep pouring over the Dnipro River and with more and more weapons and people. And now I get to say, see, I knew this would happen. I said a month ago, but would you believe me? Oh no, you knew better, didn't you? Now look where we are. I knew this would happen. I knew it. It's a fascinating way of trolling that side. This allows me to introduce a new level of toxic cynicism that they cannot push back against. As you pointed out, the big hope for Russians was that the West would get tired, and indeed, the Russians are still hoping for this, along with a mutiny on the Ukrainian side for some strange reason. So they're hoping on at least that the West will just ignore it and go away over time, that they just will get tired out, and then Russia will be able to complete its victory. But they're also hoping for some kind of mutiny, that they're going to overthrow Zelensky or something. I pointed out that sadly this won't happen, as the US are determined to fight to the last Ukrainian, which is the terms that Russian trolls use against me in my comments, that they're going to fight to the last Ukrainian. And the EU would fund the war at the behest of the US anyway. That's what they keep saying, that it's the EU being, having their strings pulled by the evil American empire, right? Since the EU is totally controlled from Washington, this is their kind of talking point. So he's using what they say. Another example of using their own Russian propaganda against them. All the governments in Europe aren't really voted for according to Russia. Instead, they get picked by Washington, as there is no such thing as democracy in the first place. Right. So a liar doesn't believe anyone else. And if the Russians are doing what the Russians are doing, like who thinks that Putin is going to actually have a free and fair election next year? He's not. And so if they know that if they're cynical about this, they're cynical about us, and they don't understand why we wouldn't think otherwise. Okay. Anyway, I was banging on that we need to strike forward quickly before the West gets its act together, as there is only a short window of opportunity. Then the EU figured out how to get 50 billion of aid to Ukraine, and that once again allowed me to say, I knew it, but you wouldn't listen to me, as you knew better. Instead of trying to be their enemy, I want to be the worst kind of ally that there is. And he underlined this in the writing. Again, read it again. Instead of trying to be their enemy, I want to be the worst kind of ally that there is. The kind that moans about every setback and amplifies every loss. The only really tough part is pretending to be happy when they celebrate a Ukrainian setback, but it needs to be done in order to keep my cover. In one of my more recent efforts, I focused on Putin's speech to the G20, where the Kremlin had promised Putin would deliver a shock speech. When it happened, it turned out to be a non-event, really. And I talked about this in one of the 3 big stories videos. I went on Telegram to complain that Putin's speech was weak and was being perceived in the West as a preparation for capitulation. Love this guy. My avatar said that he is, quote, tired of Putin's weakness in the face of Western aggression, unquote, and that Ramzan Kadyrov would make a much better president, unquote. I'm sure that Ramzan Kadyrov would be really worried about his life if there were calls on Telegram for him to replace Putin. The Russians do complain about my attitude, as you can probably imagine, but they don't suspect that I am in any way pro-Ukraine. Actually, the worst thing they do is call me a fake Russian, as my avatar has Russian parents but did not grow up in Russia. My avatar is also an economist and has challenged the rosy forecasts from the Russian central bank with the data. What a great way to go about doing that. That really upset them. However, my suggested fix was to revert Russia to a centrally planned economy so that the government can control all the industries and capital of the state, which is what Russia is starting to do, which is kind of interesting to watch. In this way, capital can be deployed fairly to each according to his need and from each according to his ability. Well, he's getting a A+ for paying attention to Marx in school. I mean, in a good way where he doesn't actually believe that, of course, but anyway. That suggestion was not well received, but I keep pushing it, and now they can't argue against it, as it looks like that's going to be Kremlin policy soon anyway. I keep banging that drum myself, that what the Russians are doing is re-Sovietizing, not for Marxism, but for authoritarianism. They have never accused me of being a Westerner, but in one of the last messages, I got the following reply from a user, and it has something in Russian Cyrillic that I don't understand, but the translation was, Taras Shevchenko is spinning in his grave with envy. I Googled who Taras Shevchenko was, and I realized that this was the most endearing insult ever directed at me. I honestly felt really touched by it. It's a bit like being called an American pig by these people. They do mean it as a hurtful insult, but it is in fact a high compliment. Now back to the situation at the front, with the capital flowing to Ukraine again and Russia's losing on all sides, plus the fact that North Korean ammo seeming to be more of a liability than an asset, there is not much for the Russians to look forward to except for more crippling inflation and increasing state repressions, as well as more of my moaning. Okay, so I'm not done yet. I have just a couple paragraphs to go, but it's really interesting. We're feeling down. But the Russians, those that are cheering on the other side, I don't mean the trolls that are coming to bother you, but I mean those cheering for the other side in Russian Telegram channels are actually pretty demoralized too. In fact, perhaps more demoralized than anything that we're feeling, and I want that to be encouraging to you. He says this: I would suggest to any of your viewers who have a cell phone and a few minutes to spare in the day to try to join my efforts. Russia has been waging an info war against your country for years now. All the divisions in your society don't stem from widely differing opinions in society, but rather efforts of people like me on social media to divide. I think he's very right about that. Read Putin's playbook, you'll see that. What the Russians were doing is not trying to put Trump in power, but to divide the country so that whether Trump was in power or Hillary was in power, that it would be intolerable for either of them. They're just as happy to support BLM as support white racists in Charlottesville. Just remember what America was like back in 2010 before social media took off. One person can make an enormous difference, and if you are willing to wear the cloak of being an anti-West, pro-Russian person for a few minutes each day, you will see how you are being manipulated by foreign powers on the one hand, and you will be fighting for Ukraine in an info war on the other. If we can't directly encourage Ukraine, we can certainly demoralize Russia. What a great line. My request to your viewers who fear that they won't be able to succeed at this or think it's too hard is to try anyway. If you fail, at least it will be a failure that you can be proud of, as you did not turn your back when there was something you could do. At the very least, you will learn how America is being manipulated by nefarious social media actors, and you will be bringing justice to those who have sown division in your country. The most important thing to remember, and I cannot stress this enough, is to never try to change anyone's mind online. People don't like having their minds changed. Just pretend always that you are pro-Russia and you'll be able to speak the phrases from Russian propaganda like they're your own words. Focus on things like, quote, "We will be in Berlin in 2 weeks," unquote, and later worry about the lack of progress and the question of what's going wrong. It is clear to me that the FSB has their people in each of the English-speaking chat rooms, but these people are not the smartest in the world, and they're trying to control the narrative and shout people like me down. They are at a major disadvantage, however, as their speech is really restricted. They can't even use the word war or say anything negative about the government without being sent to prison. Obviously, I enjoy asking them about their political views. I would advise your viewers not to badmouth Putin too much, as you will reveal yourself and draw too much focus. But pretty much anyone else is fair game. You can question Putin's motives and express some doubts, but I don't recommend going further than that. Remember, you're supposed to be overseas from Russia and are wishing for the Ruski Mir to come to, quote, liberate, unquote, you, and you have no idea that there's no freedom of speech in Russia at all. Keep fighting the good fight, a regular viewer, and that's the end of his letter to me. Okay, I'm not sure what to say here. I mean, there's something brilliant about this. I'm not advocating that you go do it. If you want to go do it, try it. It would be an interesting experiment to see if you put yourself in that place, how much you can actually say, but I'm not advocating that you go do this like he is. I am saying from what he did, he provided some powerful insights into what's going on. We're feeling demoralized on the pro-Ukrainian side. Imagine how you'd be feeling if you were on the pro-Russian side. All right, that's all that I have. Tell me what you think about this in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Have you had some kind of experience like that, or would you ever consider doing anything like that? Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.